We have a few things to cover on the CB750 build, like retrofitting some wheels that aren't really meant for the bike, as well as cleaning and painting the engine. Let's get into it. At the end of the last video, you may have seen that I received a set of GSXR forks for this bike. I still need to fit them up, but I'll get to more of that in a second. For now, we need to clean the parts and then vapor blast them ready for paint. While I was blasting some other parts, my friend Glenn got stuck into pulling the valves and springs out, putting everything in separate bags, numbering everything, ready for reassembly. Well, I've left the hardest piece to last. As you can see around all of these intake ports, there is a bunch of silicone where someone has obviously tried to fill up or seal a vacuum leak. That stuff just does not want to come off in the blast cabinet. It just bounces straight over the top of it. Preparation is key when you're trying to get a good paint job, and so what I've done is I've vapor blasted everything with 120 grit aluminium oxide, and then I've gone ahead and put wax and grease remover over everything. Just a quick tip here, if you're going to use this wax and grease remover, I highly recommend not using the standard spray bottles. For some reason they just destroy them. They work for about probably an hour or maybe a day, and then they'll just die. So what I've done is I've upgraded to one of these solvent pumps. These things are fantastic. I'll leave a link to one of these guys in the description if you want to check them out. And the thing that's probably taken the longest when it comes to painting is masking everything up. I'm pretty fussy and I want those nice crisp lines, so I'm spending the time to get it perfect. So the paint that I'm using is a Duplicolor enamel with ceramic semi-gloss. This stuff is fantastic in the black, and I'm doing a red accent, kind of like a little sneaky, subtle feature, if you will. As you can see, I've got a rear wheel in place. It's a CBR 1000 wheel, so it's an extremely tight fit. Don't know if this is the way I'm going to go, but let me know in the comments if you like it or you don't like it, or if you think I should go spokes. And the front end swap came from a 2011 GSXR 600. If you're doing a fork swap or you want some high quality bolt-on parts for your motorcycle, go and check out Cognito Moto's website. They have a ton of stuff. I'm just waiting on the triple tree set for these forks so I can fit these properly to this bike. And if you're doing a fork conversion that they don't list on their website, send them an email. They have an amazing customer service. There was a little bit of fin damage on the sump cover, but considering it's the underside of the bike, all I did was sand it back to a nice contour, and then once you paint it up, you'll never know. And after all, it does sit on the underside of the bike, and I'm pretty sure the exhaust pipes are going to cover it anyway. I used some JB Weld steel to do a little repair on one of the engine side covers that had a bit of damage on it, and now that everything's all painted up and looking amazing, I've put it out of harm's way in the office waiting for the internal engine parts to arrive. And now to dive into some of the fun stuff, which is the machining. I love fabrication, and there's going to be a ton of fabrication on this bike. For now, we're actually stealing the R6 front wheel off my Virago, and this spoke pattern on this R6 wheel is exactly the same as the one on the rear that I've fitted so far. So I'm leaning towards that way, but I may end up going spokes, I'm not too sure. But to fit this wheel, I need to make a 2.5mm spacer. So the caliper bolts won't line up, but if I do get the wheel and push it all the way to one side, this is what happens. As you can see, the rotor sits all the way to one side of the caliper, so we're going to rectify that by making some spaces for the rotors. There is always an option to move the calipers, but I think in this instance it's going to look out of place if I try and do that, so what I decided to do is just space out the rotors. The spacer will bring the rotors out to 2.5mm, which is exactly what it needs to fit this bike. These little transfer punches are fantastic at mimicking whatever holes you have already in something and you want to transfer it to the new piece of material. I'll leave an Amazon link to this exact tool in the description if you want to go and check one out. The aluminium grade that I'm using for this is 6061, so it's perfect for this application. So the wheel has these little raised location lugs for the rotor, but rather than machining those off, I decided to leave the wheel alone and just make my spaces accordingly, meaning I just needed to make a couple of extra slots so it would lock in place. If you're interested in fitting a set of R6 or R1 wheels to your GSX-R, I'm going to leave my email in the description below for you to go and send me an email and say, yes, I would like a kit, because I might end up putting a kit together with these spacers as well as the shoulder bolts and the spacers for the axles. As you can see, that's now fixed the issue. The rotors now sit in the middle of the calipers, which is perfect, which means the caliper mounts can stay exactly as they are. I'll need to make spacers for this as well. I don't have the correct axle, so I've ordered the GSX-R axle. Another thing to mention is the bolts. These are shoulder bolts apparently. As you can see on the shank there, this dowel piece goes inside the wheel, and now that I've added a 2.5mm spacer, I'll need to make sure that the shoulder bolts go into the wheel to the right depth. I couldn't be happier with how those spacers turned out, and if you're running a GSX-R front and you don't like the 3-spoke wheel like I don't, and you want to run a 5-spoke off a R1 or R6, that's how it's done. I haven't quite figured out the rear wheel yet, but it's looking like I might have to make a new hub or try and source one from a different bike to move this sprocket in towards the wheel, about 12mm from what I can tell so far. But I'll have to leave that for another video. And as always, if you've enjoyed this video, go and check out this one. There will be a playlist for this entire video series right here. But we also had a delivery today. This is a 1978 CB750 tank. It doesn't quite fit on the frame perfectly. It needs to be lowered at the back, but a little bit of finessing and some fabrication and we'll get that sorted.